Anyway, started. Here we go. I'm starting. People are coming in. We're just waiting for all the attendees to be able to log on. So we'll start in just a moment.
What a beautiful day today.
So gorgeous. And yesterday.
And warm, weirdly warm.
So I think we're going to get going. Well, good evening and welcome everyone to Late Winter Pruning in the Garden, presented by the Central Oregon Master Gardeners and Oregon State University Extension. My name is Janet Dart, and I will be your host. Master Gardener Pat Colling will make a short presentation, and then Pat, along with our fellow Master Gardeners, Chris Meow, Jennifer Gold, will answer any questions. But first, a little housekeeping for our webinar. All videos and microphones are off except for the presenters. If you have questions for Pat, Chris, and Jennifer, please type them in the Q&A window, which you can find on the bottom of your screen. Your chat has been turned off. All questions will be answered after Pat's short presentation. If you have the same question as someone else, please click on the thumbs up button icon next to the question to move the question up the list. When the webinar is over, you'll receive a short survey. Please take a moment to fill it out. And finally, a link to this recording, along with links to all reference websites, will be sent to you in a couple of days in case you wish to review any of the information. That's it for housekeeping. Before I turn this over to Pat, we'd like to know a little bit about our audience. Please help by participating in a short poll. Aha. I thought everyone was shy, but here they come. It's like about waiting till we're at about 80%. I can open for a few more seconds so Pat can see the answers. And here are the results. Oh, you know what? I ran the wrong one. This is for attending the live one.
Yep.
So much. This is I usually have someone else run the poll. Okay, so now we know who's going to attend live. Okay, we've got several coming to Hollands Head, several coming to, and we'll talk about this at the end of it, where to show up. Okay, so thank you for that. And I'm going to stop sharing that. I'm going to run the one that I meant to run so we can find out. Sorry about that. Okay, try this one. Okay, well, got 90% answering that, so I am going to end the poll and see where everybody, how much experience everyone has. I think, Pat, you can see the results, right?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so it's kind of split.
Pretty even.
Yeah.
Right, in terms of gardening experience.
So this should be, we should have something for everybody in this. So thank you. With that, I am going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn this over to Pat to give you a little presentation.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everybody. I hope everybody enjoyed the beautiful day that we had today. Today, we're going to talk about late winter pruning in the garden. I think that's what everybody's intending to hear about, so that's what I'm going to talk about. Let's start first about talking about what is pruning and why do you prune? And it sounds like, you know, we have a nice varied group in terms of experience. So some of you probably have been pruning for quite a while, and some of you have probably not ever picked up a pruning shear and know what to do with it. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is pruning and why you prune, and then we'll go into the details of some of the hows and whens and what. So pruning itself is really the selective removal of specific plant parts for the benefit of the whole plant. So what you're really trying to do in one way is you're pruning to improve the plant health. You're removing any crowded, dead, damaged, or diseased plant material with the goal of trying to increase air circulation, increase the amount of light that gets into the plant, and to really overall improve the plant health. That's one reason why you prune. Another reason why you prune is to encourage blooms and foliage. So some plants are going to be blooming earlier, and you'll prune those at a different time than those plants that are pruned later. And we'll spend some time talking about what those plants are and how you know the difference, etc. You prune to control shape and size. You can prune to remove errant branches that might disrupt the shape of a plant. You prune to make sure that it's shaped the way in a natural way. It's a little harder to prune to control the size of a plant. If you've planted a plant that's going to get too big and you put it in the wrong place, it really is kind of difficult to prune it to control the size. And that's why the whole right plant, right place is important. So when you're choosing a plant, you want to make sure that you choose one that you know the mature size and that it's going to work in the spot that you put it in, because it is pretty tough to try to prune to control overall size of the plant. And then you prune to eliminate hazards. If they're overhanging branches that might get in the way of a pedestrian, a branch that hangs onto your house, and you may remove branches for fire prevention reasons, etc. So those are the main reasons why you're pruning: plant health, encourage blooms and foliage, controlling shape and size, and eliminating hazards. So the overall keys to pruning are: how do you prune, when do I prune, and what do I prune? And I think those are questions in terms of, if you're a beginner, you want to sort of know, how do I prune? As you get more experience, you might ask yourself, when's the ideal time to prune this plant? And then, of course, in order to achieve the goal that you're looking for, what do I prune to reach the goal that I want? Basics of pruning are pretty much the basics for any type of gardening that you may do. You want to keep your tools sharp. And it really is important in pruning, because you don't want to have a dull blade and you tear the branch instead of cutting it. So you want to make sure that your tools are very sharp. Also, between when you prune and go from plant to plant, tree to tree, you want to make sure you sanitize your tools between plants. And that's really just using a spray bottle with rubbing alcohol that you spray onto your tool between moving from one plant to another. This really helps to prevent the spread of any type of disease from plant to plant. And then, of course, you want to make sure you dispose of the plant material properly. If there is any sort of diseased material, you want to make sure that you dispose of it in a proper way. Some of the tools of the trade in terms of pruning include a bypass pruner, which is this little guy here. And that's used to use for branches that are a little less than 1/4 of an inch. Depends upon the strength of your hand. But again, you want to make sure that you don't tear the branch. So you want to make sure that you're using the right type of tool, because if the branch is too small and the branch is too large, pardon me, and the tool is too small, you may end up tearing the branch, and you don't want to do that. So this is the bypass pruner. This is the bypass lopper, which is the same similar kind of blade, but it has the long arms, which if what you're trying to prune is high and you can't reach it, that's one reason why you would use a bypass lopper. But it also gives you better leverage in terms of strength. You've got the long lever arm that really helps to make the cut itself easier. And then a pruning saw. And that's used for bigger branches, bigger areas that you might want to trim. And you want to get a nice pruning saw that you can, both when you pull forward and backwards, it cuts. So a pruning saw is another one of those tools that really helps make your pruning easier. So how am I going to position the pruner itself? The best way for you to position your pruners is making sure that the blade is closest to the part that remains on the major trunk. So if you look at this illustration here, you can see that the blade right here of this bypass pruner is right against the branch. And you can see this little ring here. You want to cut away from that. Don't cut too close to it. Don't cut too far away from it, but about where this particular blade is positioned. So you make sure that the blade is closest to the part that remains. And again, as I said before, using the right size tool makes a big difference in terms of not tearing that branch. The position of your pruning cut determines the future direction of the new growth. So where you put that cut, where you actually make the cut on the branch or whatever it is that you're pruning, determines the future direction of the new growth. And I'll show you a couple of illustrations of how that works in the next couple of slides. The shoots will grow out in the direction that the bud is pointing. So standing back and making sure you know what you're trying to achieve when you do your pruning really helps you to say, this is where I'm going to make the cut, or this is not where I'm going to make the cut. You make some decisions before you ever start cutting. So these are the portions of some description of some of the things that I'm talking about in terms of the buds and where you're going to make a pruning cut. So this is the terminal bud right here at the top. This determines how long the branch is going to go, right? It's going to go straight from here. That's called the terminal bud. These are additional buds. And in this particular illustration, it's called an alternate bud arrangement. So you can see there's a bud and then there's a space and then there's another bud and a leaf and then there's another space. And you can see they alternate, right? One's on one side, one's on the other, but they alternate. That's called an alternate bud arrangement. In contrast, these two illustrations show an opposite bud arrangement. So the buds are right opposite each other, right? One's on one side, one's on the other, they're opposite each other. And you can see if you cut right across here and you cut below and there was a bud here, you're going to get two buds coming, or two branches coming up off of that one branch. So you can see how where you make the cut is going to make a difference. So in an alternate budded plant, so the ones where there's an alternate bud, the best place for you to make your cut is for about a 45-degree angle above the bud. So you can see it's about a 45-degree angle here. This is really too sharp of an angle above the bud. This is really too close to the bud and too low. And this whole cut is really too high above the bud. So what you're trying to strive for when you make that pruning cut in an alternate budded plant is about a 45-degree angle above the bud, okay? If it's an opposite budded plant, you're gonna make a horizontal cut between the two buds at about this distance. And then that one illustration on the slide before, what happens then is these buds are gonna go off and one's gonna go this way and one's gonna go that way. So you're gonna make a cut that's going to determine where that plant or where that bud continues to grow. Removal of the terminal bud, as I said, allows those lateral buds to grow. So if you take off that terminal bud, the two lateral buds that are left are going to continue to grow. And the removal of any kind of a plant part stimulates the growth. So what happens when you prune is you are really stimulating growth. You're creating, you're saying to that plant, I need to grow in this direction or I need to grow in that direction. And if you cut right here, too far away from the bud, this is an alternate budded branch. If you cut too far along here, you're really too far away from a bud. There's not much that's going to happen here. This remaining stub is just going to die. You really want to cut closer to the bud, just like in the preceding illustration, so that you're cutting at about a 45-degree angle. So then you're going to get some growth of that branch going upwards here. You can prune to change the direction of growth. And once again, this is when you're going to stand back and say, what's my goal with pruning this particular tree or shrub or whatever it is that you're pruning? Let's say it's a shrub and you're trying to encourage more of an upright direction of growth. So what you're going to do in that situation is you're going to take this branch here and you're going to prune it off, because this branch is going to continue to grow upwards. You're going to remove this one so you won't have that outward growth this way. So you're going to get a more vertical direction of growth on this particular branch of this shrub or tree. If you're really wanting a more outward, you want to make a wider branch, you're going to take off those inside branches that are growing up and more linear, and you remove those, and then you're going to get the outward growth moving in the other direction. It's going to cause more spreading. This is really going to give you more upright growth. When you cut back branches, you always want to cut back to a part that's going to continue to grow. So that's really that illustration where you cut off and it leaves a stub. If you leave that stub, there's really no place for that stub's not going to grow. There's no bud on it. So you want to cut it back to a part that's going to continue to grow, which would be this part here. So cutting off something to shorten it and just whacking it off right here, you're not going to get the growth that you want. You want to cut it back to a bud so you continue to get more growth. And you want to leave at least half the size of the part being removed. So you want to leave a big enough branch that's about half that size so you get the growth that you're looking for. So there's different kinds of cuts to make when you prune. One type of pruning is called a thinning cut. And with a thinning cut, you're going to remove an entire limb to the point where it originates, which could be all the way to the ground. This can be used to reduce the size of the plant without changing the form of the plant. And a good example of a thinning cut is when you are looking at a red twig dogwood. A red twig dogwood has really beautiful red bark, but as it gets older, the branches, the older branches are no longer red. And you can make a thinning cut when you prune a red twig dogwood, and you would thin those older branches down to the ground, and that way you get a rejuvenation of the red twig dogwood branch color, which is what you want. A thinning cut also increases light and air circulation, and it's, as I said, in relationship to the red twig dogwood, it can renew and rejuvenate the plant. So it's a method of removing limbs where you thin the plant, increases the amount of light and air circulation, and can renew and rejuvenate the plant. And we'll give some examples of those, but here's a good illustration of what it looks like when you're thinning a shrub. So if you take a look at this shrub, and you can see all these branches, the dotted lines are branches that were removed. And some of them were removed all the way to the ground. Oops, sorry, back up. My clicker, too fast on the mouse. And you can see they also thinned some of the branches here, right at the main branch, to actually allow more light and air to get into this plant. So you can cut some of these branches all the way down to the ground. You see where they made the cuts here? And you can see where this branch came off because they were trying to encourage an upward, more narrow growth of this plant. And then you can see what you end up with when that plant leaves out in in the spring and later in the summer. But you don't want to take any more than 1/3 of the plant. That's a lot. And this is something that you would not do every year. You might do it every 2 or 3 years, but you can see how much it opens out the branches itself, better air, better light circulation. So that's a thinning cut. A heading cut is a cut where you're actually removing part of the branch back to a bud. And that basically is you're taking a top of the part of the branch back to a bud. And which way the remaining bud points will determine the new growth direction. And that goes back to just that basic, you know, if the bud is going in one direction, that's the way the branch is going to grow. So you really want to make sure when you're making these cuts that you look and see, this is what I want this plant to do, and make a cut relative to that. A heading cut reduces the shrub's height, but it does retain the natural form of the plant, because you're reducing it, but you're cutting it back to a bud that just then allows the plant to stay in its natural form. So here's an example of that. You can see what in this example, they just did a heading cut right at the bud, all of these buds, and cut them back. And then the shrub is bushier than when the new growth resumes, so that you've encouraged growth in that plant by doing some strategic pruning. And you can see it might feel kind of, gee, I'm really cutting quite a bit of that off, but that plant, you know, that really will encourage growth in that plant, and just something that it's good to do. You really want to keep it to a minimum. You don't have to go, you know, whole hog, just do a bit at a time, stand back, see, gee, should I take a little bit more, stand back again, because remember, once you cut it off, you can't put it back. You can always cut more. And then the last type of a cut is called a shearing cut. And a shearing cut really destroys the natural appearance of the plant over time. This is really, you know, topiary. So they've done these because this is the way they want this plant to look, but this is not the natural form of this plant. To me, it sort of looks like a green meatball. And you probably, in most cases, want to avoid the green meatball. You will see a lot of pruning that's done this way, that you know, just it's quick, it's easy, you've pruned off some of the dead growth, but over time it does destroy the natural appearance of the plant itself. It removes most of the flower buds, so it's something that you probably, unless it's the look that you're going for, you know, if it's a topiary or something, that's something different. But generally speaking, we plant plants because we like the way they look. So it's kind of nice to be able to maintain the actual natural appearance of that plant. So when you shear a shrub, basically what they did is just take, without really regard to where I'm actually doing the cut, there's no buds here, I'm just sort of making that a particular shape. Oops, right. And you can see that that's how you get this sort of the foliage is at the ends of the branches rather than on any of the interior pieces of it. And it really doesn't look the way it might have looked had it been retained the way it is in its natural form. So when you're tip pruning, which is basically a form of a heading cut, you want to try to keep the plant shape, the natural shape of the plant when you're pruning. So stand back, look at kind of the framework of the shrub that you're pruning, and just take those tips that sort of give you the shape, you know, the errant ones that are sort of fly away, that don't really add much to the plant. You know, try to keep those things under control, but don't don't overdo the pruning when you're tip pruning. You just want to get those very ends to keep those errant branches under control. When you do tip prune, you want to tip prune to a strong bud, just like we talked about before. You know, that's going to give you some branching that you want, and it's going to induce the strong branching. If you're if you're pruning a hedge, and this is something that I didn't really realize, that didn't think about it. I've never actually had a hedge. But if you have a boxwood or something that you are trying to encourage to hedge, you should make sure when you shear it or when you prune it, that you're keeping the hedge narrower at the top so that sunlight can reach the bottom branches. So you don't want it to be wide at the top and narrow at the bottom, because the top part of the plant will actually shade the bottom leaves, and you'll end up having the bottom part of your hedge bare, which you really don't want. So if you're doing a hedge, which isn't all that popular anymore, it used to be pretty popular, the hedges, but you want to keep them where they're narrower at the top and broader at the bottom. So when to prune. Okay, so now we kind of got the how to prune. What are the things that, what are the different types of pruning that I'm going to do? So, a lot of us have questions about when should I prune this plant? And I think that that's probably one of the bigger questions that folks have. When should I prune it? Well, it goes back to the first thing, first of all, is why are you doing the pruning? Are you pruning to shape the tree? Are you pruning to improve the health of the plant? Are you pruning to try to get encourage blooms? So, those are things to consider first in terms of when you prune. Why are you pruning? The second thing, though, to consider is in most cases, you're going to prune while the plant is dormant. And that would be now, basically, late winter, early spring. And things are really starting to bud now. So if you've been out in your garden, you can probably see that those little buds are starting, they're swelling. In some cases, there might even be a little bud break. So you want to do that pruning while the plant is dormant. One thing, though, that's really important in terms of determining when you prune is you should know your garden plants. So one thing that experienced gardeners should do, and new gardeners, it's a good habit to get into, is that when you purchase a plant, that you keep the tag in one way or another, whether you just save the tag, whether you write down the type of plant along with the variety and any other information that might be on that plant tag, because that will help you to know when to prune that plant. So knowing your garden plants is really important, and keeping a good track of the variety of plant that I have, and so that I know when I should prune that plant. So if you're trying to encourage bloom in your shrubs, it really depends on when that shrub blooms. So those shrubs that bloom in later summer, like a hydrangea, those are the things that you're going to prune late winter, early spring, because they're going to bloom. The bloom is going to come on wood that grows this season. Okay, so that sort of a plant, that hydrangea, and again, it depends on the variety of hydrangea. So you're going to want to know which variety you have. But they're going to bloom, if they bloom later in the summer, August, etc., they're going to be blooming on wood that they grew this year. So you don't want to prune right now, or you do want to prune right now. That allows that plant to encourage that growth, so you'll get a bloom. If contrarily, there's a plant that blooms in spring, so for example, a lilac or a forsythia, they bloom in spring. You don't prune that plant now. If you prune those plants now, you won't get a bloom. They should be pruned immediately after bloom, because they produce their flowers on growth that occurs after they bloom. So they say that, and you'll see this written, they bloom on old wood, but basically they bloom on wood that is formed after they bloom in the spring. So again, if you know your plant, you can write down, and we'll show you some ways to keep yourself some records. But knowing when that plant blooms it should help you determine when you should actually prune it. Okay, and then you should prune anytime if there's a hazard, you know, if there's a branch that's broken, if it's diseased, you should prune that anytime. There's not a bad time to do that. So again, as I said, emphasize, know your plants. Plants and shrubs that bloom in midsummer, you can prune now. You should prune to encourage flowering. That's what you're going to do right now. The goal of pruning some of those shrubs and plants now is to encourage flowering. You can do some thinning and removing of old canes. That helps encourage the vigor. So if you're pruning because you're really trying to improve plant health, just be aware that in those plants, those shrubs that bloom, you may be decreasing the bloom for this year. But if your goal is to try to improve the vigor of the plant, you may be willing to sacrifice some blossoms just to encourage the vigor. So, you know, again, it goes back to what's my goal with the actual pruning? Why am I doing it? You can certainly cut back things now. You can do some shaping now. And just because we're all heading into what we know is extreme or exceptional drought in our counties, you should try to hold back a bit on excessive pruning, just because it stresses the plant. It encourages new growth, which of course adds to the need for more water. So just, you know, this year in particular, when we're kind of trying to figure out what's going to be the best way to deal with our water issues, it might be a good idea to hold back on excessive pruning. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't prune, but just, you know, just keep that in mind when you're pruning. So here are some examples, and this is at the Waterwise Garden, which is, well, I'll give you the address at the end of the presentation. This is where we're going to do one of our demonstrations in the garden. And this is hydrangea right here. It's obviously in dormant right now. And this is a variety that blooms in the late summer. So we'll be able to come into the garden and prune this shrub, and it will encourage additional flowering when it blooms. Basically, it blooms in August or so. Behind this plant, the hydrangea, this is a viburnum, and it's big. It's kind of gotten to one of those things where it's bigger than we thought it was going to be. And so one of the things we want to do with this plant is some thinning, and you can see it's kind of messy in there. There's a lot of extra plants. We also have some rooting that's occurring with this plant. And if you do come to the demonstration on Saturday, you'll see some of the other issues that we have with this viburnum. And we'll probably do a little bit of heading to kind of shape it this way. Now, the viburnum does bloom, so we may decrease our blossoms this year, but we think that to improve the health of this plant, we probably want to do some thinning and heading. There's also a mountain mahogany, which I don't have a picture of, which is a native plant that's also in the, it's a native large shrub that's gotten really large, and we're going to be pruning that to help control the size, which again, right plant, right place. It was one of those things that maybe it shouldn't have been planted where it was, but it is. So we're going to be doing some pruning of that. And then spirea, and a lot of us have spirea in our gardens, and there are different varieties of spirea, some that bloom in the spring with those little pink flowers. I think one's called magic carpet or something like that. That's knowing the variety and knowing that it blooms in the spring. You're not going to want to prune that right now. But the gold flame spirea, which is really known for its foliage, you can do some pruning on that, because that will encourage brighter foliage and a more beautiful plant. So again, you just kind of need to know the variety of the shrub that you have. And if you don't know, you can always do the old Google search. It blooms in the spring. You probably know by now that you get those little pink flowers in the spring. You wouldn't prune it right now. You'd wait until after it blooms. The blue mist spirea, which is also called a caryopteris. This is a different type of spirea. It's one of those shrubs that blooms bright blue toward the, actually almost into the fall, late summer, early fall. And it's a shrub that can be cut way back down, almost, within about 6 inches down to the ground. And it renews that plant every year when you decrease the size of, when you cut that way back. It's similar to like the Russian sage, and this is a picture of a Russian sage. And you know that the Russian sage blooms also toward that same time, late summer, early fall. You get those big, beautiful blue spires. And this actually can even be pruned down further than it is. And you sort of prune it back. In fact, right now you can see some buds coming up on the Russian sage. The one in my yard's got little buds on it. You can just prune it back just to in front of a bud, and that will also do what is called renewal or rejuvenation. So it really pushes that plant out, and all the blooms are on this season's wood, right? New wood, this season's wood. So those kinds of things you can prune now. The other thing is grasses. Sometimes people will cut back their grasses in the fall. To me, some of the beauty of the grasses is the winter interest that they bring. So if you did not cut your grasses back, you should cut those back probably now before new growth happens. Because if the new growth comes and then you trim them back, you're going to cut off the little tops of the grasses, and that just isn't as is not as attractive. So those kinds of things you want to be out there pruning back the grasses right now. And then this is a red twig dogwood, and we talked at some length about the red twig dogwood, but you can see this was a relatively young red twig, but you can see there's kind of a darker branch right here that you can see is older. There's another one that's like right here, and they're just not quite as red, and you can prune those back, further down to the ground. They, as you know, if you have one, they get big, and it's a good idea to do that kind of pruning to it. So this is just an example of a way to sort of categorize, your plants in terms of when should I prune them, a way to just kind of keep a record of your plants and when you should prune them and what sorts of things you did that current year, what kind of notes did you take. So the lilac, as I said, it's going to bloom in the spring. I saw some forsythia blooming right now. So these things are really early bloomers. You're going to prune those after they bloom. I mean, basically it's a early summer type pruning. The red twig dogwood, you could certainly prune that in the summer. You can prune it. It blooms in the summer, so you might want to be pruning it now as well. Hydrangea, same thing. It's going to bloom in late summer. You're going to prune it now. The viburnum, prune to shape and to thin. The grasses and the blue mist spirea, you can cut back severely to renew. So it's just an example of a way to sort of keep yourself sort of organized. Whether did I prune last year? Should I prune again this year? Anything that you can think of that will allow you to keep track of your plants is always a good idea. So that's basically it. We've included lots of links here on different types of pruning trees and shrubs, garden notes. And I think that you'll be getting something from us, so you won't have to try to frantically copy down these different resources for you. We also included something about pruning roses, because people always have a lot of questions about pruning roses. So it's a really good, a good resource as well. The PNW, the reference books, there's things in the library. Pruning and Training, the American Horticulture Society is available at the library. And then there's always the OSU Extension Plant Clinic. The phone number is 541-548-6088. And you can call that number Monday through Friday if you have specific pruning questions, and Master Gardener volunteers there will be available to answer your questions. So these are the addresses of the on-site pruning demonstration. I'm just going to leave this available here at the Hollands Head Waterwise Garden on Saturday from 1 to 3 at either of these two locations. And that was the poll that you took. So we kind of know where you might show up. The Waterwise Garden is in Hollands Head Park. The address is 1235 Jones Road. It's kind of on the east side of Bend. And then the OSU Extension Office is in Redmond. It's at the Deschutes County Fairgrounds. It's by parking lot J, and they'll have some signs out for where to meet in Redmond for the pruning demonstration there. So that's also on Saturday from 1 to 3. So I think that's it. So I guess we'll open it to questions now. Janet, do you want me to stop the share?
Might want to leave it up just for a minute so people can write the addresses down, though, because the email will probably, the links will probably go out Friday night, so it'll have that address in it. But you might want to write that down if you intend to come.
Okay.
And then we could probably open it up. And if Chris and Jennifer want to put on your video so we can see you. We do have a few questions, not a lot, but they're starting to come in. So I'll take this one that came in through chat because I forgot to turn it off, even though I said I would. It's the first webinar of the year. I'm a little rusty. So Kathy wants to know, I wonder if you did talk about this, but I wonder if you could specifically address lilacs. Should I prune now or later or not at all? Who's got a lilac? Do you want to take that, Chris? You're muted.
Unmute, Chris. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I've got a lilac, so I can tell you what the usual plan is for lilacs. Lilacs bloom in the spring, and we keep our fingers crossed that they will bloom, because oftentimes lilacs get hit by, we get real warm like we are right now, and then you get a frost and it kills all the buds. So you don't get the bloom that you're hoping for. But if we're fortunate and you get bloom, they are spectacular. So you don't want to cut those off or cut the growth off now. You will do deadheading of your lilac right after the bloom fades. So you'll cut those off and the plant won't spend a lot of time generating seeds and that kind of thing. So you'll do that. If your lilac is older and you want it to rejuvenate a little bit and increase its blooming, then you do prune it now. You can do it now or you can do it after it blooms. You cut the older canes out of the lilac all the way down to the ground. So it will spend a lot of its energy then growing new growth, and that will increase your flowering the next season.
Thank you. I was listening because I have a lilac too, so I've been winging it. So it was beautiful last year. This goes back to the beginning when you were talking, and who of you has junipers? I know Chris has some, but Kate wants to know, I've shaped mugo pine successfully by pinching out the candles in the spring. Has anyone tried shaping a native juniper by pinching off the terminal bud? You're saying no, Jennifer, you haven't done it, or not a good idea?
Yeah, I have not done that.
Yeah.
I mean, I do prune my, I have a number of dwarf conifers, and I do trim those every year by trimming off for a third, or if I want to keep that particular conifer down real low, I trim all of that candle off. And that does a good job of keeping your smaller conifers under control. But I've never tried it with I'm not sure whether you're talking about like a Western juniper or an ornamental juniper.
She says native juniper, so probably,
yeah,
probably the ones that are all over.
Yeah.
Are we talking a juniper shrub or a tree?
A tree, if it's a
Tree.
native juniper.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never tried it.
Yeah, I don't think anybody worries too much about them because they're actually kind of an invasive species here.
Yeah, and they do suck up a lot of water.
A lot. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Kate, if you have more questions on that, just pop into the Q&A. There's a lot of questions about the timing again, so just get right into those. Ada wants to know, I'm confused about the timing of pruning. Early winter pruning would be in November or December? Or are you saying early winter pruning is now in the spring?
Early spring
Yeah, this is
pruning
late
is what we're
winter.
talking about. Late winter, early spring.
Yeah, did I say early? I might have misspoken.
Well, we get so
Late
confused
winter.
because where I came from, late winter was January and late winter here is March. So, you know.
Or it's anybody's guess when it's going to
Right.
be. It varies
Right.
a lot here. So you do have to pay attention to what the weather is doing
Yeah.
and to actually go out in your garden and look, as Pat mentioned, at your bud swell and when things are getting ready to open up. And you want to make sure before you get real bud break that you're doing your pruning.
So what
And it
happens if,
also,
oh,
sorry, I was going to say it also kind of depends on where the plant is. If it's in a protected area that gets a lot of sun, it can be in its own little microclimate, and the season might be altered because of that. So I have a clematis that's on the east side of my house that's very protected, and it's already, you know, opening into leaves, and it's already been into bud break, which is kind of surprising. But I have clematis in other parts of my yard that are more exposed, and they're not even close. So it just kind of depends. You have to really know your plant and when it's going to produce buds and go into bud break and then start leafing out. You really have to pay attention to that. And it could be earlier or later, depending on its location on your property.
Yeah, and I think that most of us, just to jump in terms of, I don't think that most of us feel that people are going to be out in the garden pruning in January. I mean, so to me, late winter is when you can actually start getting outside and doing things. And of course, you know, we've got different climate, you know, there's been a lot of warmer days, but that's why it's really, you know, you really think about late winter is March, is the beginning of March is still winter. You know, the first day of spring was just last week. So, you know, you're still looking, but again, it depends on whether you're looking at bud break or bud swell, et cetera. So, you know, this is not a bad time to start pruning.
and what is the problem of pruning after the bud break? I mean, is it just because it's, I don't know. If I have that question, someone else has it. Because we always say before bud swell and bud break. Is there a reason?
You know, if you cut it off after the bud, afterwards, you're really taking some of the juice away from the pruning. You know, if you do it before the buds are getting ready to go, you know, you can prune any time of the year, really. It's just what's the best time to do the pruning that you want, so that you reach the goal that you're trying to reach.
So
It's going to get more growth
Right.
and get more energy into the growth that
where you want it to be.
plant will
Right.
if you
Chris is
prune.
freezing up a little bit.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the second thing is the second thing, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, okay. The second thing is that it's a whole lot easier to see where the buds are,
Right.
and you can see what branches are going off in kind of weird directions and that kind of thing when you don't have a bunch of leaves on the branches. So it's just an easier time to see what you want to cut off in early spring or late winter.
Thank you. Diane has a question about the mountain mahogany you're talking about. Should a newly planted mountain mahogany be pruned to shape? I know you work with it. We've all looked, we have one in the Waterwise gardens. We're all
Yeah,
like,
I mean, you can. I mean, it depends. If it has an errant branch that's kind of weird, I would probably shape it a little bit, but.
Well, a mountain mahogany is such an aggressive grower
Right.
that it's hard to shape it. at all. I think your greater challenge with a mountain mahogany is to keeping it to size, if that's going to be an issue for you. I don't think you have to worry about shaping it.
So Diane, if you're in the Bend area, it might be good to, if you can come by to the Hollands Head Garden. It doesn't have to be, if you can't make a Saturday, even come by and see, because it's right in the strip between the parking lot and the community vegetable garden. And you can see it's just got, I've got some of them that aren't growing very fast, but it's gotten huge. So you can see what we're doing with it there.
Just
Yeah,
wait, Janet.
Hmm?
They take off after a couple of years.
Yeah, so I've heard that. Well, I wanted to block
Yeah.
off my house from the street, so.
It will, it will.
So. Okay.
We will be pruning that mountain mahogany on Saturday.
Yeah.
So it'd be a good lesson for you. If you can't, like Janet said, get there on Saturday, you'll be able to see how we pruned it if you come later on.
And I'm thinking this question, should a newly planted mountain mahogany, I guess it depends how big it is. I got little ones, are only about maybe 3 feet tall. And I think pruning to shape in the first years won't do any good. It's just going to take off anyway. I mean, you probably have to do it every year, would be my guess. So, all right, so mountain mahogany. Okay, so now we have back to, I'm not sure to pronounce this, Heike. Anyway, when do you prune apple trees?
Oh.
Yeah. Who's got
We
apple
didn't
trees?
really address fruit trees, so we're not the experts on fruit trees.
Yeah, we'd have,
Is there a resource on the fruit trees? Let me
there
see.
isn't on this, but I can add one to the email that goes
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, why
fruit
don't we
tree.
do that? If we can find the,
I know that we're, as a
Fruit tree
group, we're
one.
planning to do we're planning to do some fruit trees at one of our master gardeners' houses in June, which is when Amy Jo said to do it, but I had heard it's, so we don't know. We'll send you a link.
we'll send you some information.
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Sorry that we can't answer that question. Okay, Kim is asking, so many people have lavender plants. Can you speak to how and when to prune them, please?
Mm. That's a good one.
Well, I
How about-
have probably, I don't know, 24 lavender plants around my property. And unless I'm pruning the flowers for making sachets or bouquets or whatever, because I want to have something with the wonderful scent of lavender in it. And that would happen in later summer. I always leave all of that over the winter, all of those stems, because there are a lot of beneficial insects that like to live in those dead flower stalks in the throughout the winter. They build their little cocoons and whatnot in there. So I want to provide a home for them throughout the winter. And then in the spring, I go around with my shears and whack them back down to the, the leafy growth on them. The flower stems is what I'm talking about, and shape them that way. And that's been successful for me, because then they, it's something that blooms later in the summer. So it's a good thing to prune now. So that, I think that's a prime example of, if it blooms in the summer, prune it in late winter, early spring.
I think some of that is from what I've been reading, that some of this pruning, like with the lavender, I left mine out this year as an experiment and got a lot of birds and even butterflies in it, which was kind of fun,
Yeah.
eating the seeds. But then there's a lavender farm out in the Tumalo area. I can't remember the street that it's on, but I drive by, I know someone that lives out there, and so I wanted to see what they did with their lavender, and they cut them all back in the fall, so
Well, they're harvesting. They're harvesting also for oil.
Well, that could be.
And
But-
all of
But
that.
some of it is if you like it. I mean, some people don't like the look of the lavender with the dead flowers on it, so they'll trim it off for their yard. So, but we're trying to get people to like the look of it so that we can feed the insects and the bees and the birds.
Yeah, I mean, we've changed, it just depends on what you're trying to accomplish, once again, with the plant. If you're growing it as a crop for harvest, it's different than growing it as a visual and then a habitat for beneficial insects. Those are very different purposes. So,
Thank you. Excellent. Diane has a question. Any guides for native plant maintenance? Yeah, we don't have our little native group here. Any thoughts on that, Chris?
Native generally can be pruned in the same kind of way as you prune other plants. I just would not be as aggressive with that. They don't need to be pruned that often. So if you have one that's misshapen or getting too large or something like that, like the mountain mahogany, you can consider pruning it. But I would be pretty hesitant about pruning natives with a lot of vigor. And especially now that we're going into drought, they don't need to be pruned that often.
However, I just yesterday deadheaded my desert sweet because the blooms from last year, you know, they just,
Yeah.
they're dead,
Mhm.
dry.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
So off with their
Yeah.
heads.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I mean, it just kind of depends on, again, what you're trying to accomplish. If you're tidying up the plant, that's one thing. But the native plants here, I think, are not all, except for like a mountain mahogany, once it really gets established, are not really robust growers. They're high desert plants. They're meant to live with less water and in a harsher climate as a result. So I don't think pruning is necessarily an issue so much with those kinds of native plants.
Or cutting off the dead flowers, deadheading.
Yeah.
Deadheading
What you're
is,
saying. Okay.
Yeah, I
A
prune
lot
the
of
tops
people-
of my rabbit brush.
A lot of
So
people
that they
right,
get-
yeah,
think of deadheading. Don't think of deadheading as pruning,
Yeah,
but
that's
right,
it is a form
It
of
is pruning, yeah,
it is.
right.
Excellent.
Yeah, it is.
This is another question that we didn't cover tonight, and I think I know the answer to it, but Ada also wants to know about pruning raspberries, when and which canes. And that is a whole lesson in itself. And if it's all right with the other panelists, I will add a link to it. But Ada, there's also a video last year we had on Spring Seminar. Bernadine, I can't remember her last name, like the berry queen of Oregon did it. We have a whole webinar on berries, and it is available. I can send you a link to that if you would like to watch it. I think I can pick your email up from I wrote your name down, so I know you can't nod your head, but
Yeah,
I'll add a link in here about pruning raspberries, because it's a whole hour class just on doing that. And
and yeah, and you do want to know what kind of berries you have, when do they bear?
that's true, because there's a difference.
It's the same thing, probably.
I went to that webinar and I don't have raspberries, but I can't remember which is which, but yeah, some of them are different times a year. So
I'm going down the list and I see that Sally also has a question about raspberries. So you could pick her name up to send her that link off.
All right, so we'll go ahead and do that. Give me a few days to do that. I got to recover from this webinar first, but I will get that to you soon. I'll add the links to it, but then I'll try and get the video to you once I track it down. And then Diane wants to know, is after pruning a good time to fertilize the plant?
We've already encouraged, you're already encouraging new growth by just doing the pruning.
You know, I look up every plant I own and look it up and see when it says to fertilize it, because some of them say don't do it for 2-3 years. You know, I don't know. We don't even fertilize the plants at the Waterwise Garden, do we?
We haven't.
Well, this is probably another good example of know your plant, as Janet mentioned. Do your research and get to know what your plant needs individually, not only when, but what to fertilize with and how much.
And generally plants want to be fertilized this time of year. They're starting to grow,
Right.
and they need some a little, you know, oomph in their diets after after a long, dry, cold winter. You know, and you know, they are putting out a lot of energy to create new growth, and you know, they're creating their own growth hormones right now, and I can't see that there would be any problem with fertilizing now in the spring, whether you are pruning it or not at this time of year.
Well, it's true. You don't want to prune it right before, you don't want to fertilize it right before it goes into dormancy. So, I mean, that would make sense.
Yeah.
So
Well,
want
you
to
don't
let
want to
it-
encourage new growth before the cold weather sets in
Right.
either, the fall.
Right.
I mean, you just don't want to do that. It's too tender for the winter.
So,
Yeah.
so our guess, our best guess is yes. Okay, so Kim wants to know, back to lilacs. Okay, Chris, you're our lilac queen here.
No,
I haven't.
Jennifer is.
Well, Jennifer, okay.
Oh, no.
What?
Right.
Lilac. Because I know
Lilac.
I know you have an older tree. Kim has an older lilac tree. It has whips that grow straight up off the main branches. Do I leave those?
That those are what they call water sprouts. And you do cut those off. That's one of the first things when you're looking at any kind of a tree. If you see suckers coming out of the ground and water sprouts coming straight up from a branch, those are one of the first cuts you make. They're really not a productive part of the tree. They don't bloom or anything like that. So yes, cut those off.
Thank you. Julia says, I have many vine maples planted last year. Should I be seeing buds swelling now? Because she's not.
No, mine aren't doing much right now yet. Depends on where it's located, just like what Jennifer said. It's on a warm spot, but I haven't seen them. I'm not seeing a lot of budding on my vine maple yet.
I was at Ben Pine Nursery yesterday, and they have a whole section of vine maples, and they still have, some of them still have their leaves from last year, so they weren't budding at all. So
You can be patient.
Worry about that. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
There's a lot of people who want the berry information, Janet. Can you see all that?
Yeah, I've got a couple of them. Well, I'll send the link to the berry book, and then
Yeah.
you know, there is a website called administrator@gocomga.com. That was the website for when we question. Oh no, it was Waterwise on this. Anyway, if you write down, I will add that in the email. Administrator@gocomga.com is our website, and I monitor that. So if anybody wants a link to that webinar, I can send it to you if you just shoot an email to that. Okay. All right, so we're still on lilacs here. So who else has a lilac besides Chris?
I do.
Okay, Aaron says, my lilacs are old and consist of 4-inch trunks with branches coming out at about 5 to 10 feet high. Is there any kind of pruning that would help these out?
4-inch trunks with branches coming out.
Wow, that's a serious tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Well,
big.
there are lilac trees and there are lilac shrubs. We have a tree at the Waterwise garden. And so you do have a trunk on that. And then you are pruning it basically to keep a shape like a tree. So it isn't just going everywhere. So once it blooms, I would wait until after it blooms, because the lilac is going to bloom in early spring. After it blooms, shape it, prune it for shaping.
Are there multiple trunks of this shrub? I mean, is there just one 4-inch trunk?
Unfortunately, we can't get the answer to that.
Because can't you do some rejuvenation, renewal pruning of old lilacs?
If it's a lilac shrub, not a tree.
Right. I gotcha. Right.
Yeah.
Aaron, if we're not hitting your question right, can you just jump back on and add it, and we'll pick that up.
Yeah.
Because we're not sure if it's just one big trunk. We're not, and what you want to do with it. If it's too tall, do you want to make it shorter? Right. I've seen people on ladder. My lilac tree in the back needs a ladder on it, which I'm not willing to do. So it's just going to go crazy. Okay, so I lost my place. Okay. Oops. Oh, here we all are.
That was me. I messed up with the share. Sorry.
Oh, that's good. Kate is answering. Kate is back to the Western Juniper tree. I think I'll take the terminal bud off the 6-foot Western Juniper tree. I'm also planning to put a sign up that says unauthorized experimental test garden. Okay, Kate, you
Go
need to
for
report.
Let us know.
I'll tell a little secret that Kate's a master gardener, so she can give us the information what she comes back with. Okay, Claudia says, I planted a semi-large purple smoke bush last summer. The landscaper did not take care of the plant and hence leafing at the top. Can I cut the plant down, leaving about a foot or two of limbs and stems?
Boy.
I don't know how healthy it will be. I just don't know if it will send out new growth if you take it off like that. I have a smoke bush and it's an older one, and it struggles. What can I say? It's
This might be a good one to call the plant clinic about, so somebody can research the smoke tree too, because I don't know that much about it.
Don't they bloom in the spring?
Well, they
well,
bring
actually they bloom later in the summer.
Later.
Yeah, they put out the bloom, and then that's what kind of
Looks
that
like smoke.
inflorescence kind of
Right.
explodes a little bit, that creates
Right.
that smoky look to the bush.
Right.
But I have just focused on keeping the dead branches trimmed off on mine, and I didn't want to take much more because it was struggling so much, and it's hanging in there, but I do have mostly growth up at the top, not from the bottom. I just, I'm sorry. I wish I could give a better answer to that, but I don't think the smoke bush will grow like some other things if you give it that kind of a renewal pruning.
Yeah, it might not.
That kind of drastic pruning. I don't know if it would come back.
Will it make it through the winter? That would we'd really suggest that you call the plant clinic about that, because then we get it in, we get in the records and get all the research done on it, which we can't do off the top of our heads here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I don't know.
okay. All right, moving on. Kim says, when you cut back to our lavender, Jennifer, when we cut back to the lavender in the spring, can they be cut to the ground?
To the ground? No. Lavender? No. You want to trim the lavender back to the woody growth, basically. Back to where the leaves are. You have the flower shoot that comes off, that little raceme that comes up, or that spire. That you cut back to the leafy part of the plant, the gray green leaves. You don't want to cut too far into that growth, that woody growth. You can to shape, but not too far. To the ground, I think you would pretty much kill the plant.
Good to know.
Not your goal.
Well, continuing
Maybe
on,
it's your goal. I don't know.
well, she does follow up with the lavender looks dead. I'm hoping it's not. But
Yeah.
I mean, mine looks dead this time of year too. So
Yeah. Plus,
but mine might be, I don't know.
Everything still looks a little dead.
So,
Well, there's kind of a happy medium on the lavender. If you don't do a certain amount of pruning, it becomes very woody and gangly and yucky looking, and sort of lots of dry, deadish stuff going on. But if you do stay on top of it from the time you plant it, you can keep it healthy for a long time. But I do, I mean, going back to the Lavender Farm, I know that they replant their plants every so many years, because they just stop being as robust as they could be. But I have plants on my property that are probably 20 years old, and I've transplanted them, and they're huge and they're doing great. And I prune them back every spring back to the leafy growth, and they're beautiful. They're just these gorgeous mounds of that silvery green leaf growth, and then I get all of the gorgeous flower beds on them. So just back to the leafy growth.
One of the pieces of advice that kind of grows across all different ways you cut and prune plants is that you should always be patient. Don't make a cut now. You should wait till we get well into the spring to see whether it really is dead or not. You may think it's dead, but give it time. We have a lot of plants here that bloom early and bud swell and break comes early. And then we have other ones that do that growth activity a little bit later. So give your plant time to show what it's really
Right.
going to do before you start making any cuts.
Yeah.
I think we did that last year with the Japanese barberry. Remember, we kept looking at it in the waterwise garden. We're going, oh my God,
The
did I
nine
overwinter?
bark,
Because it
that
didn't.
little 9 bark.
Yeah,
we
the
thought it
9
was
bark.
dead.
Yeah.
And I have one
Yeah.
in my backyard too, so I'm watching both of them, and they
Yeah.
didn't spring up till about June,
Right.
maybe. You know,
Right.
I wrote it down when it was, because it just looks like, okay, this one didn't survive. So some
Yeah,
of them, they
that's
just
good
take their
advice,
time.
Chris. That's really good advice. Be patient. Be patient.
So with that, unless anybody else have some questions, we got a lot of thank yous. We got a lot of people want the raspberry pruning raspberry and berry. I will get that to you and give me a few days, because I have a lot of stuff to do after this webinar, and I gotta figure out where we saved it and make sure the link will work, and I can get that link out to you. It's really excellent. And meanwhile, in the follow-up email that we send out, I'll send a link to the pamphlet on growing berries. And Claudia, who was asking about, I guess the smoke bush, says, I'll take a picture of it and call the plant clinic, which is perfect. That's how we do that. I hope it survives. We do too. I actually have one that I took out of my sister's garden in Salem, and there was just a little sprout and it's growing. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
they're unique looking plants.
Yeah, they're very cool.
We are inviting anyone who wants to come to do the demonstration. Don't forget that on Saturday. I think we got a pretty decent number of from the poll. So one's here in Bend and the other is in Redmond, and hopefully the weather will hold and we'll have a nice demonstration of some of the plants. So hope to see you there.
So with that, let's see. Got a lot of thank yous. Thank you. Well, you're welcome. We enjoyed it. I'm glad you all came.
We did.
Take your evening with us. And we have lots more classes coming up. If you go to the gocomca.com website, we've got a lot of free classes. We got spring seminar, which are only $5 for a webinar. And we'll do stuff throughout the year. So thank you very much and have a wonderful evening. Happy gardening.
Thank you.
All right. Bye,
Yes.
everybody.
Bye.
Great time.